So, as you know, I'm trying to give the tutorials a new structure, and I'm going to start to include a lot of information about Python so it becomes one-on-one tutorials for people who are new to programming. And what we're going to do is that we're actually going to be going through the Python documentation that we see here. I'm going to be expanding on all of the different libraries that we can, not all of them, but the ones that are more pertinent to data science. And from there, we're gonna be improving our skills and we're gonna get to actual model building eventually. Thank you. Pay attention to this little piece of information over here because I find it very interesting. It says, by the way, the language is named after the BBC show Monty Python's Flying Circles and has nothing to do with reptiles. Making reference to Monty Python's skits in documentation is not only allowed, it's also encouraged. So if you were wondering why the program was called the way it was, we have an answer finally. Yay! We advance through the documentation. The other part that I consider it to be important for you guys, it's, for example, it starts to talk about using Python as a calculator, and it does a pretty crucial distinction between what Python considers an integer and what Python considers a float. Here I highlighted it for you guys. The integer number, like 2, 4, and 20 have type int. The ones with fractional part, 5.0, 1.6, etc., have type float. We will see more about this in the numeric type later in the tutorial. So remember, this is the site I'm using, and right now I'm just doing kind of like a small summary as we walk through it together. And I'm kind of apple picking what I think is going to be important for you guys. This part may also be a little bit not intuitive, and basically talks about the difference between a normal division and what's called the floor division. The floor division being the one in which you don't get a fractional result. You basically use the double slash here, and in order to get the remainder, you use a percent sign. And here you have some examples. Yay! Start talking about the fact that in order to calculate powers, you use double asterisk, and basically use the equal sign in order to assign a variable. If you do a multiplication or any calculation with an integer and a float, the program will automatically give a float result, as you can see here. And this little here is something that's in the interactive mode. And basically, if you're going to be using your Python as a calculator, it makes computations a lot easier because it's going to place here the last number you printed. As to string manipulation, you may find it interesting that apart from the ability of using a single quote and a double quote, you can also use this symbol, which is basically a backslash, in order to escape a quote. So as you can see in the example, you put it before the single quote and you're able to write doesn't without kind of like breaking the quote here, which it's definitely going to be useful in the future. There might be times where you would like to use a backslash and its functionality as a code escaper per se is not gonna work in your favor. For those cases, what you do is that you put an R before the first quote, such as here. This means kind of like an enter, and you can see here how the effect of having the backslash n. So if we put an R in front of it, the effects of the backslash are cancelled, and you can actually read the address that you're trying to print here. Other useful bits of information about strings is the fact that you can use the plus sign in order to concatenate two strings, and you can use the asterisk that works as a multiplication sign in order to repeat a string, and you can see that here. Perfect example. In the same way, if we put one string next to the other, it's going to automatically concatenate, and sometimes that can be very useful. If you're trying to concatenate multiple strings, you can just put them inside of a parenthesis like here, and they're gonna automatically concatenate, which again might save you some time at some point. The characters within a string also have an index, and you can call upon them like you see here. If the word is Python, the first index or the first character in the index is going to be the P, and then the fifth is going to be the M. Starts with 0. And if you use negative numbers, you basically start from the right. So -1 is going to be the very last character, and -6 is going to be the very first, which is kind of interesting. So now that we know that our strings have indexes, we can actually select parts of the string with what's called slicing, in which we put the first index that we're interested in here, a colon, and the last index that we're interested here. So it's important to know that this one's inclusive and this was exclusive. So it's gonna go from 0 to 1. And here we can read this in order to, it says it here. And this is gonna go from 2 to 4. When we see cases like this, when this one's omitted, Python assumes that's starting from 0. And when this one's omitted, Python assumes that's gonna go up until the very end of the string. And this is basically including characters from the second to last, because remember that the minus sign grabs values from the right. Now, this little function right here is going to be one of your best friends. It basically returns the length of the string, and it's going to make your life a lot easier in the future. One of the compounded data types that Python knows is the list, and it basically allows you to group different elements together between brackets, and you can have different data types within these elements. It allows for indexing and slicing as well. Lists allow for concatenation, and you can basically edit them as you go because they're mutable types. The other important aspect about lists, or method about lists, is append, which we're going to be using a lot when we get to for loops. And what it does, the append method, is like it includes an element at the end of the list. So if I append a 4 to this list, it's going to be the 6th element right here. That length applies also to lists, and that you can basically nest lists, as you can see here. And in order to call upon one of the subgroups with one of the lists inside a list, you basically have to use 2 slices or 2 sets of brackets. So congratulations on making it to the 4th point within our Python documentation walkthrough. You've made it very far, and we're gonna start working with control flows, which means that our code is gonna get just a tad more complicated. For that, we're gonna be also using this Jupyter notebook, in which we're gonna be working with examples of the different control flows tools that we can see here listed. So get excited. Yay!